So today we're going to talk about The New Possible by various authors. What this book is it's a collection of essays on the topic of systems that need change, ideas for how to maybe change them, and overall ideas of how to make the world a better place. The essays span a very large swath of topics, but almost all of them are about reforming some system that's viewed as problematic in some way. So, just briefly, here are the categories in which the essays are put: Earth, Us, Change, Wealth, Work, Food, Education, Love, Community, and then there's one essay on Tomorrow. And so, in general, these essays are problematizing a variety of things, the most common of which are environmental problems and environmental change, as well as wealth inequality is viewed as being kind of systemically among the bigger problems throughout these essays, although each author has like a different take as well as different sorts of things that they focus on, so it's hard to just cast a broad net. But a lot of the proposals for what they want to implement are things that have never been implemented before. So they're new ideas, hence the title, The New Possible. And one of the defenses the book sort of gives for this jumping or ideas that aren't really that proven in a lot of these essays is that the problems have gotten so bad in some cases that you should no longer be asking what's possible, you should be asking what's needed. So that's kind of the framework of the book, and so I think perhaps it should be more forgiving if some of these don't seem implementable. A lot of them appeal to a sort of grounds up approach. So where you build systems within a community, and then the community provides for itself either services or structure or safety nets, and it's more community oriented. In my mind, these always sound best in theory, but the implementation is how do you get communities to come together? And I don't think that in a lot of cases they answer these, but I also don't think they have to. And the community-based approach as opposed to some top-down bureaucratic approach where it's dictated by like a central government or a sort of capitalistic let the market solve all the problems type of approach. Generally, those two are problematized in the essays. So, I don't know how implementable they are. One essay, I'm going to talk about one essay in particular that I thought was particularly persuasive, at least to me, and that is there was this essay on banking. And so what the essay argues is that, first of all, there are a few problems with banking as it is now. What the government basically does, this is in the United States, is if the banks default or have a when the government will lend them money at 0% interest. So it basically makes stuff risk-free. And then when they make money, they just make money. And when they lose money, they don't really lose the money. They get a free loan. Also, in the case of 2008, a lot of banks were bailed out. And the author makes a sort of argument, it's a little tongue-in-cheek, but I think it's very fair. If a good is propped up by everyone, because giving away free interest isn't really free. Someone pays for it, and it's the American taxpayer. So the people are subsidizing these banks anyways. They should be owned by the people. And because the banks, the second point is, that's kind of similar, is if something's too big to fail, it should be public. Like, it should be a public good provided by the government. And you see this in, like, other industries that are supported for, like strategic reasons, like the United States protects its steel industry as well as food, because like in wartime you can't not have these industries domestically. Like that would be really bad. And so it is perhaps worth sacrificing some efficiency in the case of banking for stability and making sure that no one's putting their hands in the cookie jar, which seems to be the case of what's occurring, because the essay continues on, and it actually has an example. So I think it's the Bank of North Dakota or the State Bank of North Dakota. I forget. Public bank actually is more profitable than most private banks, is not as aggressive with investing because, you know, you have to, they aren't propped up in the same way that the private banks are. Like if they fail, that's really bad, or so they're more conservative. And this bank has outperformed on a ton of metrics private banks. And so it really kind of begs the question, why do we have private banks? Another point that the article makes is that I think it's some double-digit percentage of like middle America has to drive over a half hour, or maybe it's like 45 minutes in order to get to a bank. The infrastructure is just not that in place all that much for like the more rural areas. It used to be the case that the U.S. Postal Service provided banking, and bringing this back would do a couple of things. It would, one, improve the infrastructure for all people in rural America in terms of being able to go to a bank, which makes loans easier to get, which makes starting a business easier, like all that type of stuff. And then two, beyond improving the infrastructure, it would also help make the U.S. Postal Service more profitable. One of the reasons that this is not done is because there's like this FDIC sort of like provision or like allowance. There's something that banks get, like private banks get, like guaranteed by the government, that the U.S. Postal Service was denied, and this was during Roosevelt era, and it's still denied, and you would just have to change that, and you could try and bring back banking in the Postal Service. Although, like, obviously, in terms of the infrastructure, a lot of branches aren't set up to do banking, so I don't know how long it would take them to change what they're doing to incorporate banking into what, like, services they provide. Anyways, but yeah, I found that essay particularly compelling, especially because it wasn't just some sort of kumbaya, we're gonna bring everyone together sort of vibe. They had an example of something that was effective, and I liked it quite a bit. So, worthwhile if you're interested in banking, at least that one particular article. So let's get into the ratings and then recommendations. For utility, I gave it a 3.5. I think a lot of these proposals aren't feasible. And even if they are feasible, we're talking about some implementation that's, for most of them, it's not a grassroots level thing. And so for people interested in reading this, I think most of the usefulness that's going to come from reading this is just topics for discussion, like just have something to talk about. So 3.5. For novelty, I gave it a 7.5. All of these things are like new and innovative, basically, so that tends to a high novelty score. But also, I feel if you don't read this, it's like not like a mistake somehow. It's not an error. And so somewhere in there, 7.5. Pretty novel, but if you miss out, it's not the worst. Entertainment, I gave it a 4.5. It's like pretty middle of the road for a nonfiction book. Could have been a little bit better, which we'll get to in a second. For style, I gave it a 3.5. There's like a huge mishmash of authors, and they have different writing capabilities. Some of them are written quite well. Some you can tell it's an expert writing it, where the expert's not that good a writer, but okay, whatever. That's kind of how it is with nonfiction books. Often the better the writing, the less technical or well versed the person is, and vice versa. So it's just kind of comes with the territory. But there's a couple of these essays that are just really bad. One in particular is like barely readable. I think if you pick and choose what you're reading carefully and just kind of use this more of a reference book that like reading it straight through, a lot of the lower ratings that this book I gave would not be as low. And so the book overall was pretty enjoyable. It perhaps doesn't deserve the overall rating of 5.42, but that's what I gave it. For readability, I gave it a 6.5. Everything's pretty accessible. There are like some spots where I wish there were more references, but generally like adding a bunch of references to studies makes stuff like less readable. But like some of these essays have like 2 references to studies, and it just all seems really speculative, but pretty readable, even if it's speculative. And then for interest, I gave it a 7 because a lot of these ideas are really interesting because they're novel and, you know, they may not be feasible, but they're interesting. Overall, as far as recommendations go for this book, it's pretty hard to pin down any one like group that I would recommend this to. I think if you are someone who's like politically involved and you like write your representative and like that sort of thing, that maybe this is a book that would be interesting. I think that, you know, this book might be more useful for like getting discussions started in a more abstract way about things than it is like. The book is broad, it covers a bunch of different things, it's kind of a sampler, and maybe it like is good for getting one in a certain mindset of being progressive and sustainable and ecological. But it's hard to pinpoint any one situation, cause, or activity or hobby or anything like that where this book in particular would stand out. Because reading a much more specialized book on the topic would probably be better for whatever it is. So it's hard to recommend this too much, although I found it interesting. Like if I were to try and give it an overall rating of without using my sub ratings, just averaging them, I'd probably give it like above a 6, maybe 6.2, 6.3. I certainly don't wish I had my time back or anything, but it's like weird to recommend the book. Anyways, as far as discussions go, what is one thing that you think dramatically needs change or overhaul? And second part of the discussion question, you do not have to have a certain path. It's just you just have to find this like really problematic with the way things are done. For me, the banking was a good example because I thought the alternatives sounded fantastic, although I don't know a tremendous amount about banking, so there's also that. I'm certainly open to changing that opinion. Anyways, have a good one.